Live from SABC studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, welcome to this evening's edition of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo.
12 is wiped off and only 2 left out of the family of 12. And you still have an audacity of going there and still. You are not a human being yourself. You are some kind of an animal.
It's a race against time as senior government ministers have to move to defend a restless public that appears skeptical about the government's abilities and commitments to help victims of the floods that ravaged parts of KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape. And despite a no-show today by President Cyril Ramaphosa, the Eastern Cape government says it's continuing with mop-up operations, assisting the victims of the province's share of the devastating floods. We'll also look at the curse, some say, of municipal managers, that municipal managers, I should say, have now become. We ask why these officials that are supposed to run municipalities efficiently and effectively have now become sources of wars and conflict in many towns and cities across the country. And is Defence Minister Thandi Modise purging her predecessor Nosviwa Mapisa Ngagula's staff? That's what we're asking tonight as allegations surface that that's exactly what she is doing. All that and more coming up in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts now. Police Minister Begicele has dismissed suggestions that the government isn't moving as swiftly in assisting victims of floods in KwaZulu-Natal. He was speaking during a media briefing by Cabinet's Justice, Crime Prevention and Security Cluster earlier today.
The aftermath of the devastating storm that ravaged KwaZulu-Natal. More than a week later, families are still wandering around searching for their loved ones. Police Minister Begicele says the death toll from the severe floods has been revised down to 435 from 448. He says the other 13 deaths are not related to the floods.
435 people have died as a result of the flood that ravaged the KwaZulu-Natal province. There was a figure of 448 fatalities, which has now been revised down to 435. This is a result of autopsies performed on 4 bodies, and it was determined that the deaths were murder-related as they were found with bullet wounds. 3 of the bodies are from Pinetown and 1 is from Sydenham. 9 more people were determined to have died from natural causes.
The Minister of Finance has announced that 1 billion rand is immediately available to assist, with private donors also chipping in. Cela says government will act swiftly and harshly against those who intend to steal any money meant to assist.
People that are plundering and stealing money will be arrested. Simple. The President has issued a very strict instructions here, but it would be good if people don't wait for the police, they listen to their conscience. The situation is dire there. Some of us who have walked down there, when a family of 12 is wiped off and only 2 left out of the family of 12, and you still have an audacity of going there and still, you are not a human being yourself. You are some kind of an animal.
More additional personnel and helicopters will be deployed to continue to assist as the search continues. The Department of Home Affairs will also be open to assist with lost documents at no cost.
We are walking this painful path with the people of KwaZulu-Natal to lift this heavy burden off their shoulders. It is hands on the deck to alleviate the misery and pain to the families and communities affected by this disaster.
The minister also disputed allegations that government failed to respond swiftly to this disaster. Nhlanhla Khatlhane, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Police Minister Becky Icele there following the crime-fighting clusters briefing earlier today, where they were detailing the things that they are going to do or will be doing or have already started doing. Tomorrow, he'll be delivering a eulogy at the funeral service of Sergeant Busisiwe Mjwara. That's the 42-year-old member of the South African Police Service's K9 Search and Rescue Unit. She died while conducting search and rescue and attending to incidents of drowning and retrieval of bodies in the Msunduzi River in KwaZulu-Natal. During the same operation, K9's Lee from the Durban Central Research and Rescue SAR unit also drowned while attempting to assist Sergeant Mjwara. May their souls rest in peace. Now, our colleague Criselda Lewis has been on the ground in KwaZulu-Natal today, like yesterday, accompanying rescue teams as they crisscrossed the eThekwini region. Close to 100 people are still missing in KwaZulu-Natal.
As the death toll rises, there are scores of people that are missing or still unaccounted for. Here in the Ilovu River, rescue divers have been looking for a 10-year-old boy who is understood to have gone missing here near this river yesterday. Residents of this area have been waiting here, hoping that he will be found. We also understand that a number of rescuers from several provinces around the country have been brought in to assist with rescue efforts, not just here, but in other areas where there are said to be quite a number of people that are missing. We've spoken also to organizations that have also come on board to provide some of the relief to some of the residents that are desperate, in particular in areas where there are areas that have been cut off because the infrastructure itself has completely collapsed. Some of the emergency services have also been unable to reach these areas because the roads are so badly damaged that it is inaccessible at this particular time, while government says that it will bolster its efforts to bring in more people to assist. The community of this area is hoping that the 10-year-old boy will be found alive. Well, this as there are many others that are still missing in different parts of this area. We've spoken to mothers and fathers whose children have gone missing. The agony of the past couple of days has really come to the fore, where devastated families are asking for more assistance from government and for the deployment of more of these rescue divers to various areas that have been devastated by these floods over the past couple of days. Criselda Lewis, SABC News in Amanzi Mdodi.
It was also a day of prayer for the people of KwaZulu-Natal. Premier Sihle Zikalala was among those in attendance.
United in prayer, religious leaders comforting families who lost loved ones and those who survived the raging floods. Some families are still searching for relatives.
No one is taking my calls at the mortuary since last week. We have not buried.
Others are comforted by the fact that they'll be able to lay their family members to rest.
We are here about my child who drowned on Tuesday. We are grateful for all of the support.
Government says 168,000 people were affected by the torrential rains.
Among those, we speak of the Mdletshe family of Indwedwe, who lost 4 children. We speak of Jikela family and Makhoba family in Georgedale, who lost 5 family members each. We speak of a family from Dazenhoek where 2 people died but 9 are still missing.
Business leaders say thousands of people have been unable to go to work since floods hit the province.
Just the southern basin between the harbour and Toyota and the breweries in that area and Umlazi area, 45 to 60,000 people are not working right now for the last week.
Search and rescue teams have been deployed in different parts of the province to help locate the missing bodies. The IFA has called for unity as the province recovers from the disaster. Thulani Msimanga, SABC News, Durban.
Also in Durban was the Minister of Communication and Digital Technologies, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, who has visited the province to assess the extent of the damage to telecommunications and ICT sites from the floods. She briefed the media on her department's recovery plans for the affected regions.
It's at this time of like this that we continue to plead to South Africans to open not only their hearts but also to open their wallets and donate. And we appreciate the efforts that the telcos have been doing to raise contributions and for the relief and also the interventions for their customers that they have planned on doing. We are working with the Telcos Association, it's called ACT, and next week we should announce together the joint details of the relief effort that they've been putting through. We are continuing to plead with South Africans to say open your hearts, but also open your wallets and donate, even if it's food, even if it's water, whatever contribution you can make to make sure that the people of KZN can have their life restored to some level of normality. So in the week that comes, the following weeks, in particular starting from next week, we'll finalize the details of how the responses in terms of what have we restored for connectivity and what particular areas we are going to restore at what time and the timelines thereof. And we'll also announce the other interventions in terms of ICT. In terms of government connectivity, government institutions, which is the responsibility of SITA, which it does through BBI. In KZN, there has not been disruption in terms outside of schools and some clinics in terms of that connectivity and police stations, which we are going to work to restore. But in the Eastern Cape, the whole of Eastern Cape government, the north of the Eastern Cape, they've been disconnected for the past few days. We are working to bring in satellite technology that is offered by Centec to immediately get them back into online so that there can be business continuity. And the efforts will be detailed later in the week, but we are hoping to restore within this week still connectivity in the Eastern Cape. Centec initially in the briefing today, they indicated that areas where the transmissions have been affected, some because of the vandalism of infrastructure.
Damage to telecoms and ICT infrastructure. The Minister, of course, as you've just heard, saying they are attending to those. Now, at least 11 post offices have also been affected by the floods. But Minister Ntshavheni has assured beneficiaries of social grants that payments will be made and on schedule without any glitches.
The post offices remain critical in the dispensing of social grants, both for the indigents and the SFD grant. And when the post offices have been affected, we earlier went to the Tongad post office, which has been closed temporarily because it was badly affected by the mudslide. And we are working to say how do we restore quicker to make sure that in this event of a calamity of this nature, those who are already indigent, who are depending on the social welfare of government, do not remain excluded. So we need to make sure we've given a directive to the post office to say we need to make sure by the time that the social grants are repaid, where the post offices have been temporarily closed, they should have been reopened. Where the post offices are completely destroyed, we are still doing a stock take of how many are destroyed. There are alternative arrangements to pay the social grants to make sure that the people are not disadvantaged because of the damage to the infrastructure.
Let's stay a bit with the floods, but move to the Eastern Cape now, where President Cyril Ramaphosa didn't arrive this morning as originally scheduled. The presidency releasing a statement last night while we were still on air, postponing his visit to another date yet to be decided. A preliminary assessment shows that more than 400 households in Port St. John's have been affected by flooding, leaving over 1,000 families homeless. Humanitarian organizations such as the Gift of Givers continue to offer emergency assistance to affected families as stories of loss, fear and pain continue to surface.
The floodwater cut a path of destruction. This is what is left of what used to be homes, destroyed by a huge mudslide last Tuesday. Some have lost everything.
I tried to open the door, but I couldn't. I screamed, but no one heard me because the water was making noise. Luckily, the bricks beneath the window collapsed as it was pushed by the houses that were moving downhill. I didn't know that the houses at the top were moving down. I only thought my house was just collapsing.
I heard people cry and I went out to look. It was so dark and power lines were down. When I looked at my house, it was not there. When I looked downhill, I saw my house move. Then I saw my neighbor's house following my house as they moved downhill.
As you can see, this place, it was sunken. We had to climb on it. The mud was up to our knees, but we managed to come out. We couldn't salvage anything. We lost everything that was inside our house.
The need for assistance for the victims remains great.
This scenario proves exactly that we are in dire need of assistance and everything. Because if you have 3 houses being affected, that means those are 3 households with individuals, not one person per household, but that means a lot of people.
Since this disaster happened and people's houses were destroyed, our team were on the ground. Previously, we distributed 200 food parcels, blankets, mattresses, hygiene packs to families affected, and today another 100. The number of people that are homeless is over 1,000 rand and those affected, and our main focus is to focus on the homeless and those that are partially affected in the areas.
The private sector is lending a hand by contributing food and blankets. Fundiswa Mhlekude, SABC News, Port St. John's.
The situation in Port St. John's, where the president was scheduled to, the place the president was scheduled to visit today, but according to that statement, that visit has been postponed to allow provincial authorities to continue assessments of community needs and gather data that will inform a future engagement between the president, the province, local government authorities and the people of that part of our country. Hopefully that visit will come sooner rather than later, and the officials who still owe work that would have to be looked into would indeed meet their deadlines and deliver on that as well. After the break, the curse municipal managers have now become. We ask why these most senior officials in municipalities who are supposed to run these municipalities efficiently and effectively have now become sources of wars and conflict in many towns and cities across the country. That conversation coming up in a moment. Over the past few weeks, we've seen visuals on social media. We've seen reports of disputes around municipal managers across many of the metro and some of the town council. And the question we want to ask this evening is why these officials are now, some people say, they're being proxies for bigger, wars and interests. But these are people who are supposed to run municipalities, run them efficiently, effectively. They're in charge of teams of people who are supposed to help them do exactly that. They are the, accounting officers for the budgets that municipalities have. But these people have become sources of wars, of conflicts in many of these municipalities. And someone who is going to help us make sense of what we have seen is TK Bowe, who is a public policy specialist at the Wits School of Governance. TK, good evening. Thanks very much for your time this evening.
Evening, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, only yesterday, I don't know if you saw these visuals of the municipal manager in Mangaung being frog-marched by the security personnel in that municipality. And from what we are hearing, his contract expired a long time ago, but he was there and, determined to stay, insisting that he is there to do a job and he is there legally. But the irony of it all was that it's on the same day that the Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs was in the municipality to speak to how that municipality is actually not being well run, the fact that it had to be put under administration. Yet there's a guy, who was somewhere in another office, insisting that he's there to do a job which he has been, making, or he has made a success of. Just what you make of these developments.
Well, first, I think you have to look at each case as a unique one, because I think this is going to become quite the norm for many municipalities going forward. If I'm not mistaken, this current or the maybe outgoing municipal manager's issue has actually got a long history, which, if I'm not mistaken, has to do with the fact of how he was appointed. So that's just another issue we'll park on the side. But I think the key issue here is that, unfortunately, as let's say, we get into the war zone of sorts, and I use that word understanding the global context, but it's the issue of saying, as municipalities don't have outright majorities, what's going to tend to happen is that everything is going to become politicized. That is to say, look, yes, you're right in saying, in theory, if you read the MFMA, which is the Municipal Financial Act, and if you read the Municipal System Act, there's actually quite a clear delineation as to what a municipal manager must do, how he or she runs the team. But what tends to happen, and I think maybe an overlooked point, is say it is actually a position which requires that political leadership also has to agree to say, listen, this is the person we're entrusting. And I think maybe that's where the disjuncture becomes, that if there is no political leadership, and if there's strife, and if there's actually a bit of disunity, and especially as it relates to coalitions and other points, every position becomes a poison chalice. So the way I really look at it is to say, if we had political maturity, if we were very clear on what exactly there was a difference between what a municipal manager must do and what the politics must be, I think it would make things very easy. And it tends to work better, not always effectively, but better when there's an outright majority. And unfortunately, South Africa's coalition, or the way local government is we're still very nascent. And I still think sometimes there's more immaturity than actual leadership.
In fact, I mean, the situation in Nelson Mandela Bay brings that very last point you made, home, because what happened there is that you have a very tight, like almost even split, between those, or what the ANC had together with the people who were allied to it, and on the other hand, who the DA has, and those who, went with it. But then at some point there was disagreement, and then there were also people who fell off, who from the Northern Alliance, which was one of the coalition partners of the group that went with the ANC. Then hell broke loose after that. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, you had two people, both claiming to be, duly appointed municipal managers at the same time, and having a go at each other. It took a court decision, to then say one of them actually wasn't. And if you look at how that person who the court eventually said wasn't the legitimate municipal manager. Again, what happened there, in part, of course, was that that ANC-led coalition lost some people who defected to the other group, or some of whom actually left the system. But the fact of the matter, TK, is that we are going to be stuck with these coalition arrangements for some time to come. It's probably going to get worse before it gets better. In eThekwini, it was the same thing. They couldn't agree on a municipal manager and things collapsed. But thankfully, they seem to have been able to at least find an acting city manager in the meantime, and things seem to be going fairly smoothly, for now. But that is not guaranteed.
Yes, and I think there's also I call it the very South African way of thinking about it, which is to say the belief that things will get better. Who's to say things won't get worse? And I say this because, and I remember at the IEC when people were speaking about coalitions, and there's always this great belief that coalitions are great. But I always ask the questions. Coalitions are not what people go vote for. South African voters don't go into a box and say, I am ticking for coalition. What they're voting for is a political party. But what I think we're finding, and I think the numbers bear this out, is that South Africans didn't turn up to vote. In fact, South Africans are actually very tired of the current political system. It just so happens that the people that voted gave us this, but it's not what they intended to happen. And I think what is really missing, and this goes back to the point I always stress, that I don't think our political principles have got that maturity. And I say this, if you look at how the world over works in terms of coalitions, the German one, yes, albeit at a national level, and I would like to say more complicated than the local government one, they took close to about 6 or 4 months to form. And what they were doing was not basically saying, hey, you bravio, I'm going to give you this position, you give me this. They were actually going item by item to say, listen, what type of municipal manager would we ideally like, or what type of premier would we like? So they actually go item by line item. In case of the budget, how should we vote? And unfortunately, what you find with our system of coalition government, and this is also going to become a factor when we go into national provincial government in the next 2 years, is that these discussions don't happen. What tends to happen is to say, I promise you exposition, and then everything else becomes, well, we'll see it on the way. And I think this lack of immaturity and this lack of almost a coalition policy is what's actually going to hamper many municipalities going forward. Because what we simply have is people's personalities taking over, and they go for, okay, you go there because we have made this agreement. As you've spoken about, what happened in the Manawung municipality was not going to be a surprise. It was simply because if you're a party such as the ANC and you want to keep power there, you give everything away. But what you're giving away is not actually something on principle. You're simply giving it away for the purposes of having a position. And this happens across many municipalities in South Africa where we have high municipalities. What's missing? And I think I wouldn't want for an outright, because this is my personal view, I wouldn't want us to have to go to the Constitutional Court and the Constitutional Court to tell us that, listen, you guys need policies that are going to guide our coalitions are going to go. Because what that basically means is you guys are too immature to actually understand that the bigger principle is that you need to serve citizens. And I think, unfortunately, this is where we're going to go, because there's nothing on paper that really makes coalitions work in South Africa.
But is it about political maturity, though, TK? Or is it about greed and vested interests? Because if you look at how these things happen typically, you'll find people, having a go at a municipal manager that they don't believe serves their interests, and they will hound that person out, even where the ANC would, or any other party for that matter, would have a majority. But this has happened in most cases, great majority of cases, in ANC territory. Now, even where they have the majority, they would hound out a person who doesn't serve the interests, financial, interests of powerful forces or people within the organization or allied to the organization at that particular point. So it's not something that has only been brought about by a coalition arrangements. And even now, where we have more coalitions, you will also find that the blocks or the group would go with a municipal manager who services them, so to speak. In other words, there is always something in it for them. You will find that even where time comes to find a municipal manager, that process gets delayed. In the meantime, someone is there in an acting capacity, and for as long as they are there serving the interests, of the powerful bloc or powerful people, they then get to stay, and then Hollywood stays on. They act and act, for much longer. So it would seem there seems to be a lot of evidence suggesting that it is probably less about political maturity, but more about vested financial interests.
Well, I think the concept of political immaturity will probably cover everything in there, because it has to do with leadership, and I think we can both agree on this point that it's missing. It's been absent for a very long time, and when it also looks like when maturity also asks the bigger question of who are you serving. And you're right in saying, look, clearly they're not serving the citizens of Manaus, they're serving themselves. And I think maybe it's just a nice way to put it, say immaturity. But the point you asked about vested interest, I think politics is about vested interest. But the point of maturity comes in is to say, listen, what am I giving back in return? And unfortunately, what these politicians, and you note that I don't call them leaders, I call them politicians, they really have no capital to give back. It's simply an interest, as you said, it's self-interest. Now, for me, I think if we're to maybe take the conversation moving forward, and I always argue this point, is to say, I think this is where maybe communities also need to catch a bit of a wake-up call, which is to say, the business of how we run municipalities, or even how we run the republic, is too important to leave to political actors, because we've seen that they've failed. And I think local government presents one of those experiments which I think citizens have not fully engaged in, which is to say, when these processes are starting, why do we always have to wait till election year before we start to step in and vote? I would like to see a process which says, regardless of whatever your political affiliation is, surely the person on the street, the person who lives in your ward, we know who's capable and who's not capable, right? So why are we not really starting to advocate and agitate for them to say, listen, we want you to be the council because we've seen how you work around our street and you are someone we can trust. And I think that's what's missing. At the moment, it seems as though, and I think we have to be honest in saying this point, that we as citizens have almost outsourced our responsibility to political actors. And then we become surprised when political actors, as you're saying, are simply going for tenders saying, we'll put this person there because he or she will advance our area. And then we become surprised, we come on shows and say, listen, we're angry with this municipal manager, we're angry with this system. When what should be argued is to say, listen, how do we create communities where we can actually start to properly negotiate who goes forward, who represents us? And until we have that, unfortunately, we're going to have a system, as you've described, where there's opportunism everywhere, and you and I, citizens, really don't count in this. It's simply people who want their vested interest. And I think until we really catch a wake-up call to this, we're going to be stuck in this mode of how governance or ill governance is working.
But I also want to talk about two things you've mentioned, which probably have less to do, well, there's much to do, but they bring another dimension to the conversation. And the one is, which you spoke about as well, is the appointments. The fact that the politicians are a big part, of the process, that sees to the appointment of municipal managers. But a second one is the act itself, because apparently it makes provision for when the term of office of the group of elected councillors comes to an end. In other words, when there's an election, after that, these municipalities can then begin a search for a new municipal manager, which is something you don't get at provincial and national government, but which the local sphere of government is allowed to make. Because and one wonders to what extent politicians have then become adept at exploiting these loopholes, to their advantage.
Well, I think you kind of also see this playing out at national. If you look at the turnover of how many DGs happened because of a minister, it just so happens that as we're speaking about the local one, that is a bit different. But I think if you were to go through the Municipal System Acts, I think, yes, you've highlighted something which does need a bit of review. But I think the bigger point I think you're making, and I think I'd also agree with you, is to say we do need to maybe find a way where it's almost like saying if you've served, it's either we go one of two ways. One, we time the appointment of a municipal manager to be exactly in line with every election. I think it's doable. It's something that can take place. Or I think for me, a bigger one would be how do we create a level of stability where we say we're giving you maybe a contract not for 5, but maybe for 7 years. And obviously you attach issues of performance and what you expect this municipal manager to do. So this way you kind of take it out of the ambits of politics as much as you can. And this is what tends to happen in other countries in senior positions such as that, where you make it a bit longer than the political life. But I think you're going to probably face a lot of drawback from politicians who are going to say, but as you said, this is not our person, this is not our guy. And I think the retort should be, he's not supposed to be your guy. This is supposed to be the man or woman who is actually being the chief financial officer of this municipality, the person who's supposed to look after the finances and make sure that it runs for the community. You are simply there as political office bearers to make sure that you see and you evaluate whether he or she is doing the job in that right way. And I think that's going to probably be the big change that we need, that maybe we need to go from 5 to 7 years if we really want something solid. Or we're simply going to go for the simple solution of saying, let's make sure that the timing of when a manager is or when the process starts is very much in line with South African elections. I'm against that because we're seeing it too often in South African politics and even public policy, that it seems as though we're chasing elections rather than chasing results and how people are supposed to be bettering their lives. And you and I are going to really take a back foot into that.
Well, of course, I mean, not that the system you have at provincial and national government, has spared that. I mean, national and provincial departments and governments, from that system being manipulated as well. We've seen a lot of musical chairs there, which on their own have also brought in a great deal of instability.
No, that's very true. And look, I think I remember writing an article 2 years back on this issue of terms and on performance. And look, the argument I make, especially as it relates to local governments, is I think we've got way too many municipalities. That's maybe another issue, that a lot of those problems are sometimes happening in far-flung places that it just so happens that Manawung is a metro, so it's on our radar. But in other smaller municipalities, this is part and parcel of how things work. So I think one of the things we really need to go, if the question we're being asking is how do we get local government to actually serve the interests of citizens, I think we need to go smaller. I think we need to go more professional, so such that these issues that we're discussing become really seen by everyone, and then we actually start to come up with solutions on how they work. Because at the moment, what I fear is that this problem is so gigantic at the moment that even if we had to fix Manawung, I can guarantee that there's 5, if not 20 other smaller municipalities we've not heard of that are experiencing the same problem. So I think we almost need a streamlined way to say, how do we appoint, how do we regulate, and how do we account for performance of, yes, the administrative staff, but importantly, how do we make sure that politics doesn't interfere? We're not saying that we're simply relegating politics outside. We're simply saying if it's a negative form of politics, as we have seen in the appointment of municipal manager or how local government is working, we need to do away with that. But in the interim, we simply cannot have the situation where we're actually hoping more than anything else that things improve. Because as I say, it's a South African belief that maybe we're a nation of too much hope, but I can guarantee you things are not going to get better until we actually understand what we mean by coalition government and how we're going to regulate that. Because just imagine if this plays out at national level, when we really don't have a clear outright majority. It's not going to be joyous. In fact, things are going to get worse. And if you're an investor, and this is what tends to happen a lot of times in local economic development, if you're an investor who wants to go into a municipality, who do you speak to? Because they're going to have 3 or 4 different voices. Now, if you can just amplify this at a national level, I mean, we're already confused as things are. You can just imagine how worse it will get until we really understand what do we mean as a South African state when it comes to coalitions. Are we simply saying it's mixed masala? Are we simply saying there's going to be rules and regulations? And I think until we have that debate, we're going to have these conversations over and over again.
Just as a last point, I remember having a conversation with some of the people at the South African Local Government Association, who, I think it was the CEO at the time, it was ahead of the November elections, was saying a big part of the problem is, something that both the voters, but also the other stakeholders who have an interest in fixing, this sphere of government, is that we are all victims of what the political system actually gives us, because if people who have the highest numbers when it comes to at constituency level, at the level of political organizations, and that's the person who comes through, irrespective of their maturity, which you spoke at length about this evening, but also competence, qualifications, and all those things. If your political system doesn't give you that, then you're kind of almost helpless, at the receiving end, because there isn't much that you can do, even notwithstanding the various courses, workshops and other things that your universities like yours and your SALGAs put in place. You are limited in terms of what you can do to really, make a difference or correct the wrongs that we're seeing.
And I think this, for me, is the bigger issue, which is to say, look, I think the qualifications you need to become a councillor, I think it's just a mere metric, if I'm not mistaken. And look, I'm one of those people, I don't think having many degrees means you're perfect. It just sometimes means that you've got a higher probability of doing idiotic things, but at least you have an understanding of what you're supposed to be doing. But then, again, it raises the question of saying, I think in the 90s, when the idea of who we put forward in positions of leadership was discussed, it was an issue of saying, let's break down the barriers because of apartheid and colonialism. Let's not make sure that, let's say, if you can save, you can do it. But I think what we've seen, retrospective, that maybe that was not the best idea that everybody can serve. And I think maybe the discussion as you're putting it forward should be not now maybe making criteria for who should serve. And I think, look, those who know me will always make this example. There's a reason why the Chinese system has really gone so well thus far. It's because even the current president, Xi Jinping, he had to start at local government level and improve himself to prove to the citizens of his municipalities. And sometimes these municipalities are as big as South Africa, or sometimes as a province. And I think that's what we really need, to be able to say, listen, let's have an actual criteria of who should become a councillor, what is the performance expected of a councillor, and if he or she fails, let's really do away with them within the system, such that when people finally rise to the level of being a mayor or an MMC or being an executive, we can actually say, listen, this person was accounted for. If it comes to an issue of they were supposed to bring jobs into the area, this is a track record. If the fact that, look, they actually brought development into it, their safety and security for children and women, this is what they've done. In the absence of having standards, you're very right in saying we're going to get everything and nothing. And that seems to be the case. So yes, I'm very much one of those advocates who says we need to really raise the bar as to who becomes a councillor. I'll go as far as to say you actually need a test beforehand to say if you have an intention, at least you do a basic, financial, political, legal test, so that we can actually see, you understand which laws regulate local government, because it's quite different from provincial and national. And if you do well there, let's put you in a program for 3 years that will actually equip you such that when you stand to be councillor, you can say, listen, I've actually proved myself by doing X and Y to show that I do want to lead you. And I think there's a time is now where we have to really stop believing that everybody can become a great leader. You can't. That's the reason why we're in the mess that we're in, because we trust people too much and they've got nothing to show for us. And then we get surprised when they give us nothing in return. So I think we do need a change in how we pick and how we actually measure performance, starting at council level all the way to ministerial and eventually presidential level.
Okay, and that's where we're going to leave it. Thank you so much, TK, for your time and insights this evening. TK Boy, who's from the Wits School of Governance. After the break, a group of Defense Ministry workers allege that Minister Thandi Modise is purging her predecessor, Nosiviwe Mapisa Ngagula's staff. In fact, we're not going to go to break. We're going to go straight to that interview. And Ntetelelo Kumalo is one of of the affected employees. Ntatelo, good evening. Thanks very much for your time this evening. Perhaps first, give us a bit of a background as to who this group is. I mean, who are you? What were you doing in the Ministry of Defence?
Good evening, Vio, and thank you so much for giving us this chance to set our story straight. So basically, it's a group of individuals that were supporting the former minister, doing various functions from parliamentary liaison, administration. One of them was a spokesperson as well. But a bulk of the team was providing administrative support to the minister.
Okay. And how were you employed? Did you apply for the jobs or were you handpicked by the previous minister?
Well, there's different categories amongst us. We have been appointed in the public service from different departments. In my case, I was transferred from the Department of Correctional Services to the Department of Defense when the former minister moved to Department of Defense. Others were appointed at the Department of Defense by the former minister. So there's various mechanisms in terms of how people are appointed when they're working with the minister. Some are permanent in the department. Some are appointed on a contract linked to the incumbent minister.
Okay. And I hope I'm not being simplistic.
In our case, we were all permanent.
Okay, those who are permanent with, say, the department at face value would have, something to lean on because, I mean, they are supposedly permanent, But those who have contracts, were their contracts linked to the minister's tenure in any way?
Sure. There were those that were on contract and they were linked to the minister's tenure. But the majority of us were appointed permanently in the Department of Defense, which would have meant, and at the end of her tenure, for whatever reason, would be transferred back to the department, and the department has a responsibility to place us in suitable positions, depending on our skills, competencies, and qualifications, of course.
And roughly how many people are we talking about?
The people that are affected that were actually booted out unfairly on the 31st of March are 9. But those that were supposedly appointed, because the department is now asserting that our appointments were irregular, hence they are putting us out. So there are some that are still within the department that fall within that category of irregular appointments. Hence, we feel some of us that some people are being targeted. There's some level of unfairness and victimization about this entire process.
Now, did you then approach your HR department, present your cases, and did you do any of that?
Yeah, well, we from the onset, when we were placed on special leave after a month after the new minister came in, some officials within HR tried to engage us, and the plan was to profile us, which they did, so that they can be able to accordingly place us in suitable positions. That was the narrative from the beginning, and then it changed somewhere in December of 2021 when we were told that, listen, unfortunately, we cannot find posts for you. You guys, on your own accord, must scamper around the department and look for positions for yourselves, which we found quite odd, as we thought this was the HR division's responsibility. And in those letters, and this is how HR has communicated with us subsequent to that, purely through letters, no gainful engagement, so that we can reach a mutual agreement. Later on, we were told that, in fact, we have reason to believe that your appointments are possibly irregular. And to those that were supposedly like me, in my case, who was from the Department of Correctional Services. We are engaging your former departments. We will be taking you back there. Failing that, we'll have to terminate you, which is what they did on the 31st of March this year.
Where to from now?
Well, we have no choice but to fight this. The entire process was unfair, and administratively it was so unreasonable. Procedurally, it was not fair as well. So we have to take it up. We are going to take it up through the relevant bargaining council under the CCMA. And unfortunately, this is what happens a lot within the public service, wherein people are forced to employ expensive lawyers, where these cases drag on and drag on and drag on, and there is no responsibility that is borne by these by some bureaucrats that are really being unfair in managing administrative issues. So what we'll be doing, we'll be fighting for our reinstatement, because we believe that our appointments were regular. Okay. And it is up to the department to follow the right procedure in terms of if they want to declare our appointments as irregular. There is set procedures. The Public Service Commission has long set guidelines to advise departments so that they don't do these overhanded or employ these overhanded tactics in dealing with people and being unfair and destroying people's lives. So we will be fighting through our lawyers.
In fact,
and
it's because
one of the things that we're pushing for is for punitive court orders to be issued against officials that are reckless when dealing with people's lives.
In fact, it's because of that very last point that some people have dragged the minister, the new Minister of Defense, into this. Is there or has there been evidence, or do you even share the view that there is a political force behind what is happening? In other words, the new minister is purging stuff that was close to or belonged to her predecessor. Is that a view that you hold?
No. In our case, our view is that we are permanently appointed in the Department of Defense, and the Department of Defense has a responsibility to place us and gainfully engage us.
Okay. As far as
ultimately, the minister is the public. With regards to the minister, the Public Service Act bestows upon her the power to appoint and to fire people. Okay. So ultimately, the whole issue will end up on her desk. Okay. The functionaries are executing their duties because of delegations that she's given over to them. So, okay. But the buck ultimately stops with her.
Okay, thanks very much for your time. We're going to leave it there for this evening. We did ask the Ministry of Defense to come on as well, but they were locked up or stuck in meetings and couldn't come through this evening. And that's our show for tonight. Tomorrow, our sister programs Morning Live and The Full View will be coming to you live from the ground in KwaZulu-Natal as we continue to tell the story of one of the biggest natural disasters to hit our country in recent history. From all of us on the Watchdog, have a good night.
Nimrod CB